Hi, welcome to our stories channel. Please like and subscribe channel. I still remember that morning like it was yesterday, though years have passed and my hands have grown slower on the clock of time. The air had that stillness only early morning light can bring, soft and golden, the kind that paints even loneliness in warm colors. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed my wife and I had shared for 43 years before she left this world, and stared at the packed suitcase resting near my feet. It looked too small to hold an entire lifetime. But then again, when you get to my age, people don't expect you to take much with you. Just a few clothes, a toothbrush, a photograph or two, and the silence that comes with being told you no longer belong in your own home. The kettle hissed quietly in the kitchen. I could hear Emily moving about, my daughter-in-law. Her footsteps were light, but brisk, efficient, as if she wanted to get this part over with. She didn't mean to be cruel, I think. She just didn't know how to love someone who reminded her of things she wanted to forget. My son had been gone for 5 years now. A car accident on a winter night, one of those moments that takes the air out of your lungs and never gives it back. After he died, I tried to stay strong for her, for my grandson. I cooked when she couldn't. I mowed the lawn, kept the bills paid, fixed the dripping faucet, helped with school runs. But grief has a way of turning kindness into a mirror people don't want to face. That morning, she didn't meet my eyes when she spoke. She said, "The van will be here at 10, Richard. They said you'll like the place. It's quiet, near the lake." I nodded, though I already knew she'd made her mind weeks ago. There'd been little signs, my laundry folded but left outside my room, my dinner plate placed separately on the counter instead of the table, her voice calling me Mr. Hale instead of Dad, little distances that grew until they became walls. I finished my tea slowly. The mug still had a faint crack on the handle, the same one I'd glued back together after my wife Eleanor had dropped it years ago. She'd laughed that day, saying, "You fix everything that breaks, don't you, Richard?" But there are things you can't mend, like the silence between people who used to be family. My grandson, Oliver, was still asleep upstairs. I didn't have the heart to wake him. The boy was 9 years old now, curious and gentle, with the same hazel eyes his father once had. He loved spending evenings listening to my stories about fishing trips, about how his father built his first tree house, about the time Eleanor baked bread that turned out as hard as a brick. He would laugh, and for a moment I could almost believe everything was fine again. But Emily had been growing distant. Each time she saw us together, there was that shadow on her face, like a wound reopening. She'd been struggling, I knew. 2 jobs, a mortgage, the loneliness of a young widow. I tried to help, but perhaps in her eyes my presence was a reminder of everything she'd lost. At 9:45, she came to my door again. "Richard, the van's here," she said softly. I turned and looked around my room one last time. The worn oak dresser, the window that faced the garden, the old clock on the wall that ticked like a heartbeat. I took one last look at Eleanor's photo on the nightstand. She was smiling. She always smiled in pictures, and I whispered to her, "Looks like I'm going on another trip, dear." The driver helped me with the suitcase. Emily stayed by the porch, arms folded. There was a stiffness in her stance, a kind of practiced strength. I could tell she didn't want a scene. I smiled faintly. "Thank you for everything," I said. She just nodded, lips pressed together. As I stepped into the van, I caught sight of Oliver peeking from the upstairs window. His small hand lifted in a slow wave. I waved back, and my chest tightened in that familiar ache only old age and goodbyes can bring. The road stretched ahead, framed by trees heavy with late summer leaves. I sat quietly, the hum of the tires a rhythm against the memories tumbling through my head. I remembered bringing my son home from the hospital in that same car, back when it was brand new. I remembered the first time he'd introduced me to Eleanor, a bright young woman with ambition in her eyes and laughter that filled the house. I remembered their wedding, the way Eleanor had whispered to me, "They'll be fine, Richard. He chose well." And for a while we were fine, until the world reminded us how fragile happiness can be. The nursing home was just as she'd described. Quiet, near a lake, surrounded by pines that whispered with every breeze. The building was old but clean, painted a gentle cream color with green shutters. A nurse greeted me kindly, took my papers, and showed me to a small room overlooking the water. I thanked her and set my suitcase down. It didn't take long to unpack. You don't have much to arrange when most of your life is behind you. As the evening fell, I sat by the window, watching the sun melt into the lake's surface. The sky blushed with shades of orange and violet, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw Eleanor's reflection in the water, calm, patient, waiting. I smiled at the thought. "You'd like it here," I murmured. "It's quiet, peaceful." But beneath that peace was something else, something I'd left behind in the house, something Emily hadn't seen yet. It wasn't revenge. I'm too old for that. It was simply the truth, written in my hand, folded neatly inside the drawer of the oak desk in my room. I'd written it over several nights while she was asleep. A letter, not to scold her, not to make her feel guilty, but to remind her who I truly was and what I'd done for her and my son when they needed me most. Because the truth is, that house she called hers was never hers alone. She never knew the sacrifices behind those walls. She never knew how close they'd come to losing it all. And when she finally reads that letter, she'll understand why I never fought her decision to send me away, why I left quietly, with a smile, because love, in its truest form, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply leaves behind a letter. And as the evening deepened and the crickets began their song outside, I leaned back in my chair, hands folded, eyes half closed, and whispered to Eleanor's memory, "Let her find it when she's ready." Nights in the nursing home have a peculiar quiet. It isn't the peaceful silence of countryside air or the restful hush of a house after a long day. It's a kind of muffled stillness that carries the faint hum of machines and the soft shuffle of slippers along linoleum floors. When the nurses dim the hallway lights and the world outside fades into darkness, that's when memories begin to speak the loudest. I spent my first nights there by the window, the lamp on my bedside table throwing a pale circle of light over my lap. On the desk beside me lay a notebook, its pages filled with the uneven scrawl of an old man's hand. That notebook held everything I'd never said aloud, the things I'd hidden beneath the routines of fatherhood, of work, of pretending to be stronger than I was. And the letter, the one I'd left behind, was the heart of it all. It had taken me weeks to write, because words, when they matter, must be chosen slowly. I began it the night Emily told me she could no longer keep me in the house.
She'd stood in the doorway, her fingers twisting the hem of her cardigan, voice trembling just slightly. "I can't do this anymore, Richard. I can't." I nodded, said I understood, and I did. But that night, after she went to bed, I sat at my desk under the dim light and opened a blank sheet of paper. The pen felt heavy. I wrote her name once, twice, until the letters looked right. Then I began. Dear Emily, if you're reading this, it means I've gone. Not far, I hope. Maybe just somewhere quiet enough for you to hear what you never let me say. I paused there, remembering the years when she'd first come into our lives, bright-eyed, nervous, eager to impress. She called me Dad from the start. Eleanor loved her. We both did. She was exactly what our son Michael needed, gentle where he was impatient, bold where he was cautious. I still recall the afternoon they told us they were expecting Oliver. Eleanor cried tears of joy that sparkled like the light on the kitchen tiles. Those were good years, the kind you don't realize are golden until they're gone. And yet even then I saw the worry in Emily's eyes when money ran short, when bills stacked up after Michael's promotion fell through. He never wanted her to know, but I did what fathers do. I found a way. I remortgaged the house quietly and paid the bank with my pension. I told Eleanor not to say a word. We agreed it was worth it. For them, for the family. They never knew that every month after, I skipped my heart medicine to save the cost. I wrote those lines carefully in the letter. She needed to understand that the roof over her head hadn't just been bricks and wood. It had been built on love, on sacrifice, on the quiet decisions we make for those we call our own. At the nursing home, I reread those pages in my mind many times. I could picture her finding them. She'd be tidying up my room, irritated maybe, muttering under her breath about the old man who never packed properly. She'd open the drawer to clear it and find the envelope with her name. I could almost see her pause, brow furrowed, fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. The letter wasn't meant to shame her. I wrote no bitterness, only memory. I told her how proud I'd been watching her raise Oliver after Michael's death, how I knew every sacrifice she'd made, the second job at the clinic, the nights she fell asleep at the kitchen table. But I also told her of my quiet fear, that grief had hardened her heart, that she'd built walls so high she'd forgotten how to look over them. The second part of the letter told a story she never knew. Do you remember the winter of 2012, the storm that knocked the power out for 2 days? You were pregnant with Oliver then. Michael was out of town for work. The heating failed and you caught pneumonia. The doctor said you needed hospital care, but the roads were closed. I carried you out through the snow that night. You were burning with fever. We made it to the neighbor's truck, and he drove you in. You never woke long enough to see it, but you and that baby both lived because an old man refused to stay warm while his daughter froze. I hadn't written that to boast. I wrote it because sometimes love hides in forgotten nights, in acts no one remembers. She needed to know that before she could truly understand the letter's ending. I ended it simply. So when you think I've been a burden, remember, I stayed not to take, but to give back. The home you live in carries the echo of everything Eleanor and I gave to build it. You owe me nothing, Emily. All I want is for Oliver to grow knowing that kindness is not weakness and that love sometimes looks like silence. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Take care of my boy and forgive yourself. Richard. The night I sealed that letter, I felt strangely calm. It was as if every unspoken word between us had finally found its way to paper. I tucked it beneath the drawer lining, beneath a folded sheet of newspaper from the day Michael was born. Then I sat back and looked around the room. My life summed up in photographs, a few tools, and a cup of cold tea. When I think of it now, sitting here watching the lake ripple under moonlight, I realize I never hated her. I pitied her, maybe, for never learning that love can whisper louder than any accusation. She'll find that letter when she least expects it, perhaps on a Sunday morning while looking for a misplaced document, or maybe when she's packing to sell the house. And when she reads it, maybe she'll cry, maybe she won't, but she'll know. She'll finally know. The nurses say I sleep better these days. They don't see the dreams, though. Eleanor standing by the garden, calling softly. Michael fixing the fence with Oliver beside him. Family, still together somewhere beyond this fragile breath of mine. Tomorrow I'll write another note, for Oliver this time. Children deserve to know the truth before it's rewritten by grief. But that's another story for another night.
It had been 3 weeks since I left that house when I first heard from her again, though not in the way one might expect. I didn't receive a call or a letter or even a visit. It began with a silence that felt different. Silence has many kinds, you know. There's the peaceful kind, the awkward kind, and then there's the kind that carries something unseen, like a wind just before a storm. That morning, the nursing home was brighter than usual. Sunlight spilled across the corridors, and one of the nurses, Clara, had brought a vase of tulips for the common room. I was sitting near the window, pretending to read a newspaper, though my eyes never made it past the headlines. The truth is, at my age, you start waiting for news that isn't written on paper. And that's when I felt it, the pull of memory, like the air itself had turned toward the house I'd left behind. I didn't know what Emily was doing at that very hour, but later I'd imagine it clearly. I could see her there in the quiet morning light, wearing one of Michael's old shirts. She still wore them sometimes when she didn't expect visitors. The house would have been too still, too empty without the sound of my chair creaking in the corner. Maybe that's what led her to my room, not curiosity, but absence. The way silence starts to sound heavier when love has gone missing from it. She would have gone in slowly, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of habit. My room, the one she'd once called Dad's Corner, still smelled faintly of cedar and old books. She probably meant to open the curtains or dust the shelves, but then she'd have noticed the desk, the oak one. Eleanor's father had given it to us on our wedding day. Its drawers had seen everything: tax papers, school letters, unpaid bills, and late-night scribbles from a man who couldn't sleep. I can imagine her hand reaching for the top drawer, expecting nothing more than a few old receipts, and then her fingers touching the envelope. I'd written her name on it carefully, Emily, in the same way I'd written it years ago on Christmas tags and birthday cards. For a moment, she must have thought it was some old note I'd forgotten to give her, but she would have noticed how new the paper looked, how deliberately it had been placed.
She sat down, maybe on the edge of the bed, and turned it over in her hands. I'd sealed it with the same kind of wax Eleanor used for our anniversary letters, dark red, like the color of fading autumn leaves. She might have hesitated to open it. Guilt is a heavy curtain. It takes time to pull aside. But eventually, curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, must have pushed her past that hesitation. I can see it now. The sound of the envelope tearing, the paper unfolding, the faint smell of ink. She would have read the first line aloud, softly, just to hear it spoken into the empty room. Dear Emily. She would have stopped there, maybe swallowed hard. My handwriting has always had that slow, uneven shape that comes from years of writing with calloused hands. She would have remembered how I used to write notes for the groceries, how I'd slip her messages when Michael forgot his lunch. I think that familiarity must have hurt her, the way a ghost's voice hurts more than an enemy's silence. And then she'd have kept reading. I don't know how far she got before the tears began, maybe at the part about Michael's birth, or maybe at the line where I reminded her of that snowstorm in 2012. I wrote those words not to reopen old wounds, but to remind her that she'd been loved, even when she hadn't seen it. I like to think she put the letter down halfway through and covered her mouth with her hand, the same way Eleanor used to do when something hit her too hard to speak. I like to think she walked to the window then, staring out at the garden I'd tended for so many years, the one she'd once said was too much work for an old man. Maybe she saw it differently that day. Maybe she saw how much I'd loved that earth because it was where my family had bloomed. When she reached the end of the letter, I imagined the house didn't feel the same. That kind of truth changes the air. It seeps into the walls and whispers into every corner. She would have realized for the first time that I'd known far more than I'd ever said, that I'd seen her struggle, her pride, her pain, that I'd chosen silence not because I was weak, but because love sometimes chooses to bear the blame in peace rather than prove itself in anger. I don't know how long she sat there, but I do know that at that same hour I felt something ease in my chest, like a knot that had been tied for years had finally loosened. I leaned back in my chair by the window, eyes half closed, and for the first time since leaving that house, I whispered a quiet thank you to the wind. Later that week, Clara told me someone had dropped off a package for me. I wasn't expecting anything. She brought it in, a small brown box tied with a simple string. No name, no address, just my initials written in pen. Inside was a single framed photograph, one I hadn't seen in years. It was of the four of us, taken in the backyard on Oliver's 5th birthday. I was holding the cake, Eleanor was laughing, Michael had his arm around Emily, and little Oliver was grinning with icing on his nose. Behind the photo, tucked between the backing and the glass, was a folded note. Just one sentence, written in neat, careful handwriting. Thank you for the home you built. For him, for me, for all of us, Dad. And I like to think that was all it said. But it was enough. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need a visit. That single sentence carried more peace than any speech could have offered. That night, I slept without dreams. I didn't feel lonely. I didn't even feel old. I just felt finished. in the kind of way a man feels when he's seen the circle of life close gently around him, not as punishment, but as grace. It was a Thursday morning, the kind of morning that makes you wish you'd planted more trees in your lifetime. The air outside the nursing home was bright but not loud, the kind of brightness that feels earned. I was sitting by the same window as always, watching a bird trying to build a nest in the gutter. She wasn't very good at it. She kept dropping twigs and trying again, stubbornly. I admired her persistence. That's the thing about life. No matter how much you lose, the instinct to rebuild never truly leaves you. I was halfway through a cup of lukewarm coffee when Clara came over, her voice soft but edged with something unusual, a smile that she was trying to hide. "Mr. Whitmer," she said, "you've got visitors." Visitors. The word hit me like a ripple in a still pond. In this place, the word carried weight. Most people here didn't get visitors, or if they did, it was on holidays, with nervous smiles and quick exits. For a moment, I thought maybe she meant the pastor or one of the volunteers who came to read to us. But then she said, "It's your daughter-in-law and a young boy." My heart didn't race. At my age, it's not capable of that anymore. But something deeper stirred, like a candle flame catching after almost going out. I stood up slowly. The mirror near the hallway caught my reflection, and I barely recognized the man looking back. Thin hair, pale skin, shoulders that seemed smaller than they used to be. I straightened my collar out of habit. Eleanor used to do that for me before we went anywhere. When I turned the corner into the lobby, there they were. Emily was standing just inside the doorway, holding Oliver's hand. She looked smaller than I remembered, not in size, but in presence. Her hair, once always perfect, was tied loosely, and her eyes carried that unmistakable look of someone who'd spent too many nights awake, thinking. Oliver saw me first. Children don't hesitate the way adults do. He tugged her hand free and ran toward me, his shoes squeaking on the floor. "Grandpa!" he shouted, as if the word had been waiting years to escape. I kneeled as best I could, my knees protesting. When he hugged me, all those years of absence, of silence, of misunderstanding, folded into that one small set of arms. It was the kind of hug that makes you realize forgiveness doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it comes in the shape of a child's heartbeat against your chest. Emily approached slower. She held a small paper bag in one hand, probably filled with cookies or something polite. But her other hand trembled slightly. Her eyes met mine, hesitant, searching as if she wasn't sure if she was welcome. I smiled, or at least tried to. "You came?" I said. My voice cracked more than I wanted it to. She nodded. "I did," she said softly. I found your letter." "I know." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, surprised. "I felt it," I said, and that was all the explanation I could offer. We sat together in the garden courtyard, the one behind the chapel, with the ivy climbing the brick wall. Oliver ran around chasing butterflies, while the two of us sat on the old bench that probably saw too many goodbyes. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was waiting. Finally, she took a deep breath. "I don't know where to start," she said. "Anywhere. The middle's as good a place as any." She smiled faintly, a real smile, though fragile. "When I found your letter, I thought I wouldn't be able to read it all. But I did. Twice. Maybe 3 times. I didn't know how much you understood." "I understood enough," I said. She looked down at her hands. "I was angry for a long time, you know. After Michael died, I thought you'd blame me. That's why I pushed you away. I thought if I kept control of everything, the house, the money, Oliver, I could keep the world from taking anything else." "That's what grief does," I said quietly. "It makes us build walls when what we really need are windows." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I don't deserve forgiveness." I smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving, Emily. It's about not letting hurt own the rest of what we have left." For a long moment, the wind spoke for us. It moved through the garden, carrying the scent of wet soil and lilac. Oliver was crouched by the edge of the pond, watching a frog, his laughter echoing against the walls. She looked toward him. "You know, he asks about you every night. He says, 'Why doesn't Grandpa live with us anymore?' And I never knew what to tell him." I chuckled softly. "Tell him I was just waiting for the right season to come home." She wiped her eyes, then reached into her bag. "I brought something for you." She handed me an envelope, cream-colored, sealed with a little red wax. For a moment my hands trembled the way hers must have when she'd opened mine. "It's your turn to read," she said. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter written in careful, graceful handwriting. It wasn't long.
You were right. Love doesn't fade with walls or distance. It waits, quietly, for us to remember what matters. I forgot for a while, but I remember now. Thank you for not hating me when you had every reason to. Thank you for still being here. With love, Emily. I folded it back gently and looked up at her. She was crying openly now, no longer hiding it. I didn't move to wipe her tears. She didn't need that. She just needed to see that I hadn't left. After a while, Oliver ran back and jumped into her lap, giggling. "Mom, can Grandpa come home now?" he asked, innocent, hopeful. She froze. Then, slowly, she turned toward me. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but no sound came. I smiled and leaned back, feeling the weight of years lift just a little. "We'll see. Maybe someday soon." Oliver beamed and ran off again. I turned to her once more. "You know, Emily, life's funny. We spend half of it trying to protect what we love, and the other half realizing love never needed protection, just presence." She nodded. Would you come for dinner next Sunday? Oliver's been wanting to show you his drawings." I looked at the sky, the same pale blue I used to watch with Eleanor when we sat on our porch. I'd like that very much." And for the first time in what felt like years, I saw her truly smile, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but out of peace. That was the day I stopped counting my remaining days, because somehow life had started again, quietly like dawn through an old window. I never thought I'd see that driveway again. The gravel still crunches the same under my shoes, and the old maple still leans a little to the left, as if time had bent it with all the storms we'd weathered. When the cab dropped me off, I stood there for a long time, just looking at the front porch. It looked smaller somehow, or maybe I had grown smaller myself. The house was quiet.
The curtains I'd hung decades ago were still there, faded now, the lace edges yellowed like the pages of a forgotten book. I could smell the faint trace of lemon polish and something baking inside. Maybe she'd decided to keep the place the way Eleanor liked it. Maybe some memories are harder to erase than people think. When I stepped up to the door, I hesitated. I didn't know if I'd be welcome. I didn't even know if she'd open it. But before I could knock, the door swung open, and there she was, my daughter-in-law. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "Dad," she said. It was the first time she'd called me that in years. No apologies, no explanations, just that one word, and it carried the weight of everything unspoken. I nodded. I didn't trust my throat enough to answer. Inside, the house felt like a memory coming alive. The ticking of the clock, the creak in the hallway floor, even the sunlight spilling across the old rug, it all wrapped around me like an embrace I didn't know I'd missed. I walked through slowly, touching the edges of tables, the corners of frames, each one a small fragment of the life we'd built. She led me to the dining room. There were plates already set, 2, not 3. My son wasn't home yet, but I could smell his cologne faintly in the air, like a promise that he was near. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore, just hums softly like a lullaby. Then she placed something on the table, the letter, the same letter I had left behind. Its corners were soft now, folded and refolded so many times that it looked like it had lived a whole life of its own. She said, "I've read it. Every day." I nodded again. That was enough. Some words don't need repeating. They just need living. She reached out, her hand trembling, and placed it over mine. I hadn't realized how cold my fingers had become until that moment. Her warmth seeped in like spring returning after a long winter. She said, "Tom's been different since the letter. He visits your workshop. He says he understands now." I smiled. The workshop, that little shed behind the house where dreams and sawdust mixed. Maybe he finally saw what I'd tried to build there. Not furniture, not money, but patience. The kind of patience it takes to hold a family together. The front door opened softly, and I heard my son's voice, deeper than before, slower, steadier. He came into the dining room, and when he saw me, he froze. For a long time he didn't move. Then he came closer, eyes glistening. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't have to. He just sat beside me and began talking about the things he'd fixed around the house, the roof, the faucet, the garden. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of things a man talks about when he doesn't know how to say, "I missed you." And as he talked, I realized something. Love doesn't always come wrapped in big words or apologies. Sometimes it hides in the sound of a wrench turning, or the way someone makes sure your chair is steady before you sit. That night, we ate together, just the 3 of us. No grand speeches, no awkward tears, just quiet laughter, soft clinking of plates, and the kind of peace that comes when the storm has finally passed. After dinner, I stepped outside for a moment. The sun had already dipped behind the trees, but the sky still glowed orange, like a promise that tomorrow would be gentle. I sat on the porch swing, Eleanor's swing, and let it creak beneath me. I could almost hear her hummin', the same tune she used to sing while waterin' her roses. I looked up at the window where she used to wave at me from, and for a moment I thought I saw her there, smilin', soft and proud. I whispered, "We're home, Ellie." The wind stirred through the maple leaves, carryin' her answer in the rustle, forgiveness, love, and the quiet truth that no one is ever truly gone as long as we remember how they loved. Inside, I heard laughter again, real laughter this time. My son's, hers, and maybe mine too. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the same as before. But it was enough. And for a man like me who at once thought he'd lost everything, enough suddenly felt like grace.